Yeah. Amazing. We have someone came in, Erin.
Hey, somebody came. That's wonderful.
Yep, we have two people. Amazing.
Woohoo!
Okay, perfect. I'm just making you Elise the host. There we go. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to chat with Elise about automation. I'm just going to be here kind of like monitoring the questions on the back end. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to send them over on the chat or on the Q&A box. I've just enabled permission for you all to be able to message on the chat. But yeah, without further ado, Elise is going to get us started.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining today. It looks like there's only two of us. Is there any way we can allow to talk and then allow to talk? Here we go. You know what? There's only the three of us who are working together today. So why don't we just all be able to join the session like we're doing a regular premium care training session? I'm sorry you can hear my daughter in the background today. She's just feeling a little under the weather, I think. So I do apologize. She'll settle in a few minutes. So today, I'd like to jump in and talk a little bit about automation. What we're going to do today is a pretty standard automation training session. I'm so sorry, folks. Tech difficulties, life difficulties. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to run this very much like one of our premium care training sessions, and we're going to dive into automation. The sessions are usually about 45 minutes in length, and then we'll have time at the end for questions you might have, or if there's any workflows you'd like to walk through together in anticipation for our next session on building out some common workflows next in 2 weeks. I also do want to mention that you probably received an email yesterday that Keela has been acquired and that we're now partnering with Aplos and Raisely. If we've been a little cagey over the last few months about integrations or things like that, now you know why. These things were in the works in the background, and we're really, really excited to be able to share things like the upcoming integration with Raisely, which is, I think, really going to revolutionize our fundraising capacity within Keela. So I'm really excited about that. But without further ado, let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Stefania is also recording this session, so you'll be able to get a copy of it after as well. There we go. And sharing my screen with you. During the session, I've given you all permission to speak during the session. So during the session, if you have a question, please feel free to shout out and interrupt me. As I said, there's just a few of us here, so we can kind of keep this very informal. Feel free to yell out, ask your questions, and we can look at things together and kind of make mistakes.
Hey, Elise, there's actually someone else that came in as an attendee if you want to push them through to be able to talk.
Absolutely, I can. I'm so sorry I missed you. There we go. Hi, Megan. So now everyone should have permission to speak now. So again, feel free. I do shrink down the little box that has all your lovely faces, and Stefania will be keeping an eye on the chat. But do shout out at me. No problem, Megan. Do shout out at me if you have any questions. Okay. We do all of our training, our premium care training sessions in either a test account or a developer account, just because it allows us to make mistakes, get messy, and take chances altogether. So this one's my World of Difference account. If you happen to see anything in here that is a little different than what you might see in your home account, it's just because this is a test environment, and sometimes we're testing things out that haven't been released just yet to our general users. So from my main dashboard, I'm going to jump into automation here on the left side. And you'll see here, there's two tabs up at the top. We've got workflows and we've got archives. I really just want you to think of archives as sort of a separate folder. Your workflows is a spot where all of your sort of main or active workflows kind of can be, but you actively have to choose to push something into the archived workflows spot. Like I say, it's just a secondary folder for you to store things that maybe aren't in use anymore. But keep in mind, you can always unarchive a workflow. I'll show you how to do that. Really straightforward to do as well. So, if you archive something, you can always bring it back into your main list if you want. We can always search for a workflow, which is also really handy. One of the things that I like about this is if you plan on building out many workflows for your organization, I would recommend you come up with some kind of institutional naming convention. So for example, if you plan to push out a whole bunch of workflows for recurring donors, you might want to name them all recurring donor : and then the purpose for that workflow. Or if you have fundraising versus communication workflows, maybe you want to annotate those differently just to make searching easy. You'll notice that Amanda and I here, we tend to use this demo tag for ones that we would like to demo in our account. And this is just a nice example of that same kind of strategy. There are some limited filters available. You can look at the status of any sequence, which is handy if you want to look just at your active sequences. You don't want to see the full list. You can see those here. And then finally, there's our Create Workflow button. From this Create Workflow, you'll see that there are a number of templates available. And honestly, folks, these are hugely helpful, and they were built based on most requests from our customers and most used workflows that people were building out already on their own. So I highly recommend you check these out. And even if this specific template doesn't exactly fit your needs, remember it's just a template. It's still fully editable. So you can add or remove stages, change a starting point, change your filters, all of that kind of stuff, building off of a template. There's some really simple ones like birthday acknowledgement. This literally just uses a contact's birthday and allows you to push out an email on their birthday to them. One stage, really straightforward, happens in the background, but it's beautiful for donor stewardship. And then you might have a different one like this donation milestones. Well, it's going to have multiple stages in it because you're going to have multiple milestones that you might want to acknowledge within your organization. We will absolutely jump into a couple of these, but I just want to kind of review the general tools here before we jump into specific workflows. Of course, in addition to templates, you also have the ability to create your own. So you can name your workflow and create your assignee. The assignee is the person who I would consider to be most responsible for the workflow. They'll receive any like notifications that might be associated with the workflow, anything like that. So I do recommend having the assignee who is going to be the person who's most responsible for looking at your workflow. Now, I do want to jump in, and if you were at the demo session that we did, you probably already saw this little trick that I like to do, where I like to zoom out on a workflow. Because I want to give you an idea of what a workflow looks like overall from start to finish. Now, this one's kind of a wider workflow, as you can see, so it goes on to both sides. But I don't want you to think about each of the stages. I don't want you to think about what each of the stages do. I just want you to see the overall pattern of how contacts will move through the workflow, following the line and through each of these indicated boxes. Your starting point's up here, and then contacts flow through as they meet each criteria. They move through the line. So just from a very large scale, I want you to think about this like a family tree. I want you to think about this like a logic tree, where one piece sequences into the next, into the next, into the next. We call it a workflow for a reason, because contacts literally flow through each stage and are released from each stage. I almost think about it like a locking system, and are released from each stage as they meet the criteria or fall through or move through the action that's there. Okay, I'm going to zoom back in and I'm going to go back to the overview page now that we've kind of just had a general look at what an automation looks like. So on this overview page, you'll generally be presented with some statistics about how many contacts have moved through a workflow. Let me see if I can find a nice active one we can look at. about how many contacts have moved through a workflow. You'll see the most recent start date on your workflow, so total number of contacts, tell you the contacts who are in progress, as well as the contacts who have actually completed the full flow. There's also this really handy graph about when contacts have enrolled in the workflow. This can be really handy if you're doing, say, a social media drive for donations, and you've got a workflow for first-time donors. You'll want to see a spike in first-time donors right around the same time that you do that social media drive. So you can come here to kind of see if other pieces are working the way you're intending them to. So it's really handy to be able to come here and track. The other handy thing about this is that this is the best way to figure out if there's something not working about your workflow. If you have contacts who aren't moving through your workflow effectively, and all of a sudden you had this big spike here, and then you've got 0, well, what happened in May that you made a change to the workflow that may have tanked those numbers, that may have brought that down to 0 again? So it's always really handy to have a look at this contacts enrolled graph. I just find it really useful at a glance to just see the overall health of any workflow that you're using at any given time. And then finally, you've got your exit performance. So you'll notice that on our big workflow, when we had our big one, this is smaller, we had our big one, we had different exit stages. And it'll tell you how many people have exited through each stage within your workflow. Again, this is really handy if you've built out a multifaceted workflow that may have multiple exits. So for example, this is the summer one that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, in that it is a drip campaign, and I think it has 6 different exits, because if a contact does donate, they get 1 exit. If a contact doesn't donate, they get a different exit altogether. So again, this is really handy for determining how your workflows are working, because if exit 1 is for contacts who donated and exit 2 is for contacts who don't donate, and your exit 1 has 0 contacts in it, maybe there's a change in your messaging that you need to consider. So again, these are really good for sort of judging what the overall health of your workflow is. So I always recommend having a look here if you're curious or you're just looking to sort of keep up on where your workflows are at. Okay, I'm going to jump back into that demo workflow that we set up because it's quite robust, and it's kind of a fun one to look at. So you'll see here that we have a starting point. This workflow starts, it tells you exactly what's going to happen. This workflow starts when a contact receives an email. You can have more than one starting point on any workflow. You'll notice that all of these starting points all have to do with a contact-specific action or a transaction-specific action. So for example, a new contact is added into the system, or a contact joins a segment, all contact specific actions, contact completes a form, or they're associated with transactions. So keep in mind that when you're trying to consider how you're going to get people into your workflow. There does need to be sort of one of these trigger points to determine where you're going to start. This is just all of the conditions all together. And then, of course, you can break them down a little further in the classes on the sides. New contact added is pretty self-explanatory. The cool thing about this is that it will track any contact regardless of how they enter into your system. If they're a new donor or a new contact through a subscription form, this trigger will work. If they're a new donor through a donation form, this trigger will work. If they are manually added to the system by a Keela user, this trigger point will work. So it's really nice because it will capture all new contacts who were added, not just from a specific source. Contact joins a segment is a really handy one as well, because that allows you to filter contacts based on specific criteria. And when they end up joining that segment, they'll then move through the workflow. This is really handy if you've got folks who you want to send a specific communication to folks who live in a certain city and have made a transaction recently and have several other conditions on their records, right? So this is a nice little one to be able to use if you really need to stack conditions on top of each other. Contact completes a form, again, is a pretty self-explanatory one. The cool thing about this is you can choose one form in your Keela database, or you can choose all forms in your Keela database, or you can choose one type of form in your Keela database. So for example, if I want this to trigger only when somebody signs up for any of my subscription forms, I can select all subscription forms and it will only trigger when one of my 6 subscription forms is filled out. It's not going to trigger when a donation form is filled out, only a subscription form. This is great. This contact receives an email. This is a great starting point. If you would like to have a follow-up drip campaign to a communication that you send out. So what you'll do is you'll set up your communication here, and then you'll come and set up your workflow. Don't send your communication yet, but get it all ready and come and select your workflow. You can select which email within your Keela account this workflow will trigger based on. So you can choose, say, an end of year campaign as your starting point, and then this will flow folks through very similarly to how this one works. So this is exactly how this one is built, is with contact receives an email. They're getting a specific e-blast. It's my summer outreach campaign number 1. And then they move on through. We do have a filtering section here, and it works okay. It's fine for things like exclusions, but overall, I do tend to recommend, we can actually reset all of these because we'll show you in a different spot. I actually tend to recommend you add in here an if else stage. So this is a great segue into the stages that are available within a workflow. You have all of these different options for stages. So if else simply allows you, I just want you to think of this as yes or no. You're allowed to set filter conditions in an if else field. So we'll add it. And we had some tags that we were excluding. So we were tags, does not contain any of, we'll go with our board of directors just for this one. So now when a contact starts, when they receive the email, they're going to follow down this this line. And the very first thing they do is they're going to, it's going to determine if they have a tag board of directors. If they do not have a tag board of directors, they are going to continue down the yes path. If they do not have the tag board of directors, they are going to continue down this no path. Or sorry, if they do have the tag board of directors, they're going to continue down this no path, which in this case is going to take us all the way over here to a side to an exit point. So that's how we recommend you do overall filtering within Keela. As I said, that filters applied is okay for exclusions, but it can get a little funky when you're trying to do inclusion. So definitely consider using a split contacts, instead using that if else condition. Wait stages are kind of similar. In this case, this is just going to put your contact on a wait for the period of time that you have specified. So for example, we are going to wait and see after my email sends if this contact completes a form. I'm going to wait 5 days. If they do complete a form, they're going to move down the yes path. If they do not complete a form, they're going to move down the no path. It's simply a way of waiting and then checking the system to see if something has happened. Again, there's all of these options here. You'll notice that these actually really line up with the starting points. That's by design. So you'll have a lot of trigger points that are going to be similar to those starting trigger points as well. Again, same language for a reason. There's also a delay. This one is also, I keep saying this about all of them, don't I? This is a really handy one. I really like the delay feature because there's a concept in tabletop gaming called the stack. And effectively, when you have a stack, each move in a game has to occur one after another after another. Like when you're playing Monopoly, not everyone's rolling the dice at the same time, right? Each player takes their turn in the stack. This is very similar. So sometimes Keela will try and do a whole bunch of things at one time. And occasionally those things, I don't want to say they occur out of order, but sometimes one will take a little longer to process than the other. So I always like to include delays, even if it's only for 1 minute, because sometimes it's a nanosecond and it just takes a nanosecond for Keela to kind of figure everything out. So adding a delay is a really handy way to kind of make Keela pause for just a minute, wait for everything to process in the back end, and then send out progress to the next stage. And then finally, the meat and bones of Keela or of automation is the action points. These are the things that Keela will actually do for you as an action when a contact hits that stage in your workflow. So they can send an email. You'll notice we'll jump into the email builder and I'll show you. You'll notice that the email builder is very similar to the communications email builder. So if you've worked with the communications tool at all, you're already trained up, you're ready to go. So sending an email is really easy to do. Notifying users, keep in mind that those are specifically Keela users, and they'll get a notification under their notification bell here. You'll select which users will be notified at any point in time during the stage. Adding to-dos again gets added right onto a constituents record or a contacts record, a really handy feature. This is really useful in, for example, major donor workflows. You probably don't want the system to send out an automated email when you have a donor reach $10,000 in giving history. But what you might want to do is have a to-do added to the system for somebody on your team to either write a handwritten note or maybe call that donor and say thank you for your consistent giving over time. So adding to-dos is really nice for putting in an internal reminder as opposed to reaching out directly to a donor. You can add and remove tags. Again, this is a handy one. You'll notice in this summer outreach one, I do have a couple of add and remove tags. When we go through the workflow, I'll point those out. And those are specifically for adding things like a lapsed donor tag or removing a current donor tag if after 5 emails they have not talked to me at all or contributed to my organization. And then finally, you can modify some contact details like setting priority, adding or changing the assignee, and adding tags and notes right within Keela using the stage. Okay, now that we've talked about the general tools that go into building a workflow, let's actually look at a workflow and break it down kind of step by step. We've already talked about starting points. And we've already talked about our if-else filter. So let's follow this path down. We're going to follow the line down. So we're going to start here. So the contact receives an email. And as we saw, it's my summer outreach campaign email, which I have set up in communications. So I'll hop in here and, oh, I think it's probably been archived. Somebody was cleaning up in here. So it is, but it is my summer test communication email. There we go, back into my workflow. So that's my starting point. Then the contacts are going to move down the line. And then they're going to get split by the filter we've included here. And that is simply to check whether or not they're a board of directors member. If they are a board of director, they do have the tag board of directors, they're going to leave the workflow right away. Otherwise, they're going to continue down. And this is one of those wait untils that we talked about. So in this one, we're going to wait 7 days to see if our contact opens that specific email we sent out that triggered this automation workflow. If they do open the email, they're going to move down this yes path. If they don't open the email, they're going to split off and go down the no path. Let's follow the yes path down in this one. So now that they've opened the email, we're now going to wait until we're going to wait and see if they've made a transaction. So they've opened the email, they've looked at it. We're going to give them 3 days to see if they are actually ready to put their credit card down and make a donation. So we're going to look specifically for a donation only. We don't care how long it's been since their last transaction. And in this case, we can exclude imported transactions or transactions added via Zapier. Again, this is one of those things where you kind of have to decide for each workflow what's going to make the most sense. So for example, if you are planning on importing 100 historic donations that would have no bearing on this, I would definitely exclude them because those would be included otherwise. Otherwise, you can choose if you only import transactions once a week because you're bringing them in from an outside source, or that's how you bring in your check donations, for an example. Maybe you'll want to uncheck this in this case. So, keep those in mind when you're making decisions that these 2 checkboxes are there for you. Okay, so we're waiting until our contact makes a transaction. If they do make a transaction, we're going to add a tag which is Summer Outreach 2020 or Summer 2024 Outreach. So that means that they've contributed to my Summer 2024 Outreach program. We're going to add a delay. Delays are not only nice for making sure that the system is playing nicely, they're also really nice for making your donor think that an actual person has sent them an email. If they get an email that said, you made a splash, thank you for your donation, 30 seconds after donating, we all know that there's not a real human behind that email at all. But if we add a 20-minute delay, I hate to say we can trick our donors, but in a sense we can. We can kind of trick them a little bit to say, oh, wow, in 20 minutes, that's a reasonable time for someone to have seen that I made a donation and then written me an email and sent it out. So we can kind of make them feel like it's a little bit more personal, again, using those delays. Finally, they're going to get my email. You made a splash. Thank you for your donation. And I can show you where that is. So again, like I said, this is very similar to the builder for communications. If you've done that, you're already ready to go. You have access to all of your templates, which is handy. Both your default templates and all of your saved templates. And then, of course, you can edit the specific content. You also have access to things like smart codes, buttons, all of those things that you have access to in the communications tool, you also have availability for right here. And you'll even get email statistics about the specific emails within your automation workflow and how they're doing with your outreach. So in that sense, it's pretty handy. Okay, once they've gotten this email, they're then going to exit my workflow. They're not going to come back into my workflow. They're just going to exit my workflow and stay gone. Okay, what happens though if they don't make a donation? And you see here, this is kind of where the spider web comes in or where the tree comes in. Okay, so we're going to follow this no path down and we're going to send them another email that tells them a little bit more. Maybe they'll be willing to give if we tell them a bit more about what they're giving towards. And then again, we're going to do that wait until contact makes a transaction. If they do, same process, adding, removing tag, delay for 20 minutes, send out the you made a splash email. Delay, final ask, we wait. If they don't make a transaction, we follow the no path all the way down. We're going to add the tag lapsed donor. So that would indicate to me that they haven't given in, say, the past year. Again, though, these are institutional things that you'll need to set out as an organization of what your terminology means to you. And then finally, a to-do is added for a staff member to consider either removing the contact from Keela if that's appropriate, or adding them for a future campaign for future solicitation. And then again, they all pop out these exit stages. Okay, I'm going to jump into a couple of more workflows and details there, but I do want to go through these options under contacts as well as the options under settings. But before we jump away from this, does anyone have any questions about this specific workflow or about any of the stages or anything like that that you'd like to chat about? Amazing. I take your silence as a no. If you were struggling to hit unmute though, please, again, feel free to just yell at me. I'm pretty personable. All right, so now we've got a few options for how contacts enter our workflow, right? We've already talked about the starting points here. What happens though if I, Elise Arith, maybe didn't get this email in the first go? I didn't have an email on file at that time, but you're a fundraiser, you see me at an event and you go, oh shoot, Elise should have gotten that. You write down my email, you add it to the database, but this email from communications has already gone out. How can you get me into this workflow so that I go through this drip campaign? Because you definitely don't want to move me through manually, right? What we can do is we can go through here and we can manually enroll a contact. So we can enroll a contact, we can enroll a whole segment, which is handy, or we can enroll an individual contact from our list, or more than one contact if you'd like. So keep in mind that if you are manually enrolling a contact, even if they've already been through the workflow before, you can still manually enroll them. And it's going to tell you that here. If you manually enroll an excluded contact, because we do have an exclusion list, they will be removed from the exclusion list for the workflow. The idea is that if you're manually enrolling somebody, you are consciously making the thought to do it. So definitely consider checking these, particularly if there's more than one person who works on workflows for your organization. Next, you'll find your list of active contacts. Because this isn't an active one, I don't currently have any active contacts in here, but you'll see a list of all of the contacts who are currently within your automation workflow. And then finally will be a list of all of your completed contacts. So contacts who have already moved through and have exited out of the stage, regardless of what stage they exited out of. Under settings, this is some really important stuff too. So you'll notice here that there are email settings. First, you can choose whether you're going to send emails to folks who have an unknown subscription status or folks who have an opted out subscription status or unsubscribed subscription status. Sending to unknown is generally okay. Be very careful about saying yes to sending to your unsubscribed contacts. Sometimes folks will use automation for very specific and very tailored donor journeys. And if that's the case and you're very careful about how you do it, then you might be able to utilize this one. But just keep in mind, I of course can't provide any legal or regulatory advice. But you know, I think most places frown on sending unsolicited email to folks who have unsubscribed. Now, I did mention re-entering a workflow. So in this case, you have the option to choose whether you're going to allow somebody to enter the workflow more than one time. For my specific workflow here, where it's being triggered by a communication, the chances of them being enrolled multiple times is, you know, negligible. But think about maybe contact completes a form, right? I maybe would donate through a form multiple times. Do you want a contact to move through the workflow every single time they complete the form or only on the first completion? So this is where you'll choose whether or not a donor can repeat a workflow if they can kind of come back and go through the same process again. Keep in mind, though, that if they're repeating the workflow, they flow through just like any other contact. There's not any special conditions or anything like that you can set for repeats. So if they're coming through a second time, they're coming through a second time. So do keep that one in mind. Um, eh, that also brings me to a nice point. I don't know if I mentioned this, and I don't know if I mentioned this to any of you just in emails or chats we've had previously. I do come from the fundraising world, so occasionally I'll throw on my fundraiser hat for a second. So throwing on my fundraiser hat for a second, allowing contacts to repeat. If you do have it set to allow contacts to repeat the workflow, I strongly recommend you update the content of your workflow every 3 to 6 months, depending on your capacity as a fundraiser and as an organization. It just sucks to get the same email I got 6 months ago with the exact same information. Tell me what you've done in the last 6 months. So that's just my fundraiser hat. You can take that with a grain of salt. But if you're allowing repeats, definitely consider updating your content, particularly emails that go out. And like I said, every 3 to 6 months. You definitely don't have to do it every month or every week even. But 3 to 6 months, depending on capacity, is usually a pretty strong thing to go with. You also have the ability to exclude specific segments. So if you have a segment, for example, we already filtered out our board of directors, but what we can do is we could just exclude them if we have a segment of our board of directors. And then we can exclude individual contacts. So maybe Stefania has reached out to my organization, World of Difference, and said, I don't ever want to hear from you. I will make donations, but I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to get communications from you. It just clutters up my inbox. We can add Stefania right here so that we don't upset her by sending her an email when she's asked to not get them. Okay. Any questions about settings or anything like that? This one can be a little tricky sometimes. So please, if you have questions, this is a great time to ask. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is I'd actually like to just create a workflow with you, and I'm going to use one of our templates. I am going to do our first time donor series. This is a really nice, easy one to work with. We'll call it demo. And I'm making myself the assignee. So you'll notice that Keela automatically assigned me as the assignee because it's coming from my account. But I could make anybody who is a user at my organization an assignee on this account, assignee on this workflow if I wanted to. Okay, so we'll save. It'll think about what it's done and load. I also want to gather a little bit of data. This is a small sidetrack. I want to gather a little bit of data for our next session that's upcoming. What kinds of workflows would you like to see? What would be helpful for you for us to build out in that session? I'm not expecting many more folks than have showed up today. So again, we can be pretty informal. So please, if you mind throwing it in the chat, maybe a workflow that might be really useful to you, that will just help me plan a little bit for our next session and make sure that we can do it together. Okay, so this is my first time donor series workflow set up from a template. I'm going to zoom out so we can kind of see the whole thing again. There we go. All right, so again, this is a single line workflow, which is a nice handy one for our purposes because they're very visually appealing. It's going to start anytime a contact makes a first time donation. I'm going to reset because we've seen what it looks like. Notice that you can choose if you don't check at all or if it's within or older than a certain time range. First time donor, though, is a really nice one. We've already talked about excluding imports and Zapier. And we can make the transaction associated with a specific form, campaign, or impact area. This is really handy if you're only want folks to move through this workflow if they're giving to your shelter program, for example, versus your feeding the homeless program. So really handy just to be able to split folks out. You can do that right here within the starting point itself. Like I already mentioned, I'm just going to skip past this filter here. If I'm going to add any filters, I'll do that using my if else filter to move contacts into either a yes or a no path. It's also handy because then you can kind of get a sense of where contacts are getting filtered out or where they're getting moved out. If they're coming in through the starting point, we're never exactly sure what is the thing that's going to kick them. But instead, if we use this if else, it allows us to kind of get a better sense of what is moving a contact out of a workflow. So after they make a transaction, we're going to delay for a day. It's set up to send an email, but notice you're going to have to jump in. It tells you how many actions you have to complete. There's two here, one here and one here. So you're going to have to go in and design the email for your first time donor. Maybe it's a couple of thank you emails, what your impact is. And then maybe your last email is a request to change to recurring donor. Maybe they'd like to upgrade. Again, it's just one straightforward path. The cool thing about automation is that it just always works. Contacts will just move through. You don't have to sit there. You don't have to babysit it. You don't have to pre-enroll folks. When they meet the starting point, they're just going to follow the stages. So it allows you to be a little more hands off, which is hugely beneficial sometimes because it's getting information both to users in your organization, as well as providing contact and stewardship to your donors and to your contacts. And that's invaluable. How much time do you spend in any given day sort of sending out all of these monotonous emails? So one of the things I talked about in the demo session that you came to was think about your three biggest time sucks of the day, your biggest time dumps, and maybe automation can solve one or two of them. Sending emails for me was always a huge time suck for me, a time waste for me. I would much rather be talking to a donor on the phone or meeting with somebody in person or doing some research or something like that, as opposed to sending out a monotonous email. So these are the kinds of workflows that really make that easy and make that useful. The other one I wanted to show you, I also wanted to show the birthday acknowledgement one, because like I said, this one is so simple and so cute, and really just makes it easy to acknowledge your donors based on data that you've already got within your Keela account. So it turned out that many of our customers did in fact have birthday data for their contacts, and they wanted to be able to send out a really easy email on the contact's birthday that just said, "Happy birthday, we're celebrating with you because you're important to us." So this workflow literally starts either on their birth date, or you can set up a time before. So maybe you want to send something 1 week or 1 month before that says, "Hey, we know your birthday's coming up. Have you considered doing a birthday fundraiser for us?" Another nice one to use this for. Hey, we know your birthday's coming up. Have you considered we run puppy birthday parties at our shelter. Would you consider coming and having a puppy birthday party at our shelter? Things like that, really handy to be able to reach out to your donors based on that kind of information that's on their Keela account. And as I said, you can always add additional stages to any of your workflows. So maybe after you send the first email, you want to add a delay for 2 days, and then you want to send an additional email that said, "We hope you partied hard on your birthday." Maybe you'll consider donating some of your birthday card money to our organization. I know that's very pushy, and definitely have to consider if that is going to be a good strategy for your team. But these are just possibilities within the Keela system. Um, Major donor thank yous, volunteer management, actually, that's the one I wanted to look at. The volunteer management one is also really useful. This is all a really great one for if you are an organization that has volunteers, or you use this to register for programs or workshops or things like that. This is a really nice way to filter through folks and get specific information out to them. So after someone completes a specific form, we'll look to see which segment they join, and we've got two choices here. So we've got our, in this case, this segment looks to see if they volunteered before. If they have volunteered before, they move into our past volunteer line. And if they haven't volunteered before, they move down our new volunteer line. They're going to get emails as well as a to-do for a staff member. You can also set these to send out an email that has an additional form in it to get extra information from your contacts or your volunteers or your donors. All right. And then lastly, I do want to look at major donors very quickly and see what this looks like. So you can see here in this one, we've got 5 different stages that they can exit from. We haven't had any contacts actively move through this workflow because it is in our test environment, but you'll see here that you can see each and every individual stage, and you can also click into the stages and see the contacts that have moved through that stage or that have moved through that exit as well. Again, handy to kind of figure out where contacts are moving through and if contacts are exiting at the right points or where you want them to be exiting. So in this case, when we think about a major donor thank you, this is a nice one to kind of think about backwards. So instead of thinking about, okay, what is our starting point here? Let's think about what it is we want to actually accomplish at the end. So in this case, we want to give our biggest major donors a phone call as well as a handwritten letter. We're only tagging our major donor 2s, but we're giving a phone call to our major donor 3s. So the end goal of this workflow is stewardship of my major donors. So now I know, okay, my end goal is stewardship. What is important to me for stewardship? Sending an email or sending a letter and a phone call. I also want to be able to tag them. And so then we can figure out how to set this up, right? So we're going to split them by filters. This specifically is looking at total gift amount. Again, we're looking at total gift amount and splitting them out based on that filter. And then when we get all the way back up to the top, we're going to ask, how is it that we're going to trigger this workflow, right? And in this case, the best way would be based on contact makes a transaction. So yes, every contact in my organization who makes a transaction while this is active is going to move through this workflow. But let's look at the way it's set up. So every contact makes a transaction. We're going to delay for 2 days, and then we're going to check from a filter. Did they give between $500 and $799? If they did, they move into our major donor 1 and they get a tag, and that's it. If they did not give, if this is not their total amount of gift, instead, they're going to jump into this no filter and it's going to filter them again. And now this one's asking, is it between $800 and $999? If it is, they go down into the major donor 2 bucket. If it's not, they keep getting filtered. So again, 1,000 to 1499. They'll fall into the major donor 4 and they get that handwritten letter. And if they don't meet any one of these filter criteria that we've set up, so they are not a major donor, they're just going to exit out of this stage and nothing's going to happen. Does this all make sense to everybody? Are there questions or anything like that I can answer about workflows within Keela? I will be really upfront with you. Normally these training sessions do take about 45 minutes and we're right on the dot there. We did anticipate that there would be a few more folks in attendance and that we'd have a lot more questions coming into the chat to try and mitigate. So thank you, Don. I appreciate the response so much. It's nice to know that somebody is out there. So I would love to take this time for questions because I know that I committed to you for the full hour. So you have 15 more minutes of my time. If you have questions or comments or anything like that about the automation tool, I'm more than happy to address them. I do notice that nobody has put in the chat any ideas for our next session for workflows you might like to see. So if you don't have any ideas today, I very much believe in the rule of I don't know what I don't know. So if you don't know today what you want to look at, but maybe tomorrow you're going through the tool and you decide, oh, I would really like to learn how to build blah, blah, send me an email. Support@keela.com. And so keep that in your back pocket, send us an email and I'll add it in for our session on the 12th. Oh, that's great, Don. I'm glad that I was able to kind of cover the main ones that you need. Some of them are already templated out, like we talked about. Some of them you will have to do a little bit of building. The nice thing is that if you do have questions about how to build out a workflow, feel free to send us an email and we can make advice or give you suggestions. The other thing you can do is, and I highly recommend this, is try and build out a workflow. And then you can always send us an email and say, hey, I've tried to build it out. This is what I want to happen. This is what I think is going to happen. And then we can always have a look at it and see if the work you've done matches the results you expect. If there are no additional questions, I think we can end it there for today. But do feel free to speak up or throw it in the chat and or send us an email after the fact. We are more than happy to help. It is what we like to do. And I actually kind of enjoy playing in automation. So feel free to ask any questions. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share for now. Oh, I'm glad it was so helpful for you, Don. That's great. Oh, Aaron too. That's great. No problem, guys. I'm so glad that this was a useful session for you. I'm glad that you learned something. I hope that it makes automation a little bit more accessible. Definitely one of the things that I've heard from customers is that they are scared to purchase automation because they don't know how to use it. So I hope this kind of session makes it a little bit more easy to use and a little less scary for you to implement. All right, team, thank you so much for your attention today. I hope you have a truly lovely rest of your day, and we'll catch up really soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.